In 1631, a village on the coast of Ireland went to sleep like any other night. By morning, almost every single person in it was gone. Not killed, taken. Men, women, children, dragged from their beds and put on ships heading south, toward a coastline most of them had never even heard of. Within weeks, they'd be standing on an auction block, thousands of miles from home, being inspected like livestock by strangers who spoke a language they didn't understand. This wasn't an isolated raid. For almost 300 years, this happened again, and again, and again, from Ireland to Spain to Iceland. And the strange part isn't that it happened. It's how it worked. There was a system behind it. Routes, prices, paperwork, even something like a rescue industry. Today, we're not just going to tell you a shocking story. We're going to break down exactly how this machine operated piece by piece. And by the end, you'll understand something about the Mediterranean world that almost nobody talks about. First, where even is Barbary? It's not a country. It's the name Europeans gave to the North African coastline, roughly modern-day Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya. Port cities like Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli became the centers of it all. The timeline stretches from around the early 1500s until the early 1800s, over 3 centuries, with the most intense period between 1530 and 1780. The men carrying out the raids were called corsairs, sailors, part pirate and part licensed military operator, working under the loose authority of local rulers who answered, at least on paper, to the Ottoman Empire. But here's the detail that surprises most people. These weren't isolated fanatics operating outside the law. This was state-sanctioned. Rulers profited directly from it, and the corsairs weren't picky about geography. They hit merchant ships in the Mediterranean, sure, but they also sailed as far as Ireland, England, Iceland, and even the Netherlands. Entire fishing communities in Cornwall lived in fear of a ship appearing on the horizon. So who exactly was getting taken? And how did it actually happen? That's where it gets interesting, the capture. It usually went one of 2 ways. At sea, corsair ships, fast, well-armed, would intercept merchant vessels and fishing boats. Resistance was rare. It was safer to surrender than to fight men trained for exactly this. On land, it was raids. Corsair ships would land quietly near a coastal village at night, and by dawn, they'd disappear with everyone they could carry. One of the most infamous of these was the sack of a small Irish village in 1631, when corsairs from Algiers took nearly the entire population in a single raid, one of the largest slave raids ever recorded on Irish soil. The voyage. Once captured, prisoners were stripped of their normal clothes, sometimes chained below deck, and shipped south across open water. Conditions were brutal, and if you had any visible skill, wealth, or status, that got noted immediately. It would decide your entire future. The market. When the ships reached port, Algiers being the biggest hub, captives were unloaded and inspected, sometimes literally like merchandise at a market stall. Buyers checked teeth, hands, posture. And here's where the system gets genuinely strange. Not everyone was headed for the same fate. The most physically capable men were often sent to the galleys, chained to oars for the corsair fleet itself. Skilled men could end up as laborers, servants, or tradesmen inside wealthy households. Attractive women could be taken into wealthy households as domestic servants, or worse, into a harem. And anyone with money, family, or a government back home who might pay for them? They were kept alive, fed just enough, because they were worth more as a ransom prospect than as a laborer. That last category is the one most people don't expect. Entire prisons, or bannios, existed just to hold high-value captives, not to work them, but to wait for a payday. Who bought them? Buyers ranged from wealthy Ottoman officials to local merchants, to ship owners needing rowers, to households needing domestic labor. Some captives were even shipped onward to Istanbul as gifts for high-ranking officials. Where they ended up, most stayed in North Africa, but the trade networks connected all the way to the heart of the Ottoman Empire, meaning a farmer taken from an Irish coastal village could, in theory, end up a world away from where he started, with almost no chance of ever going home. Here's the detail that turns this from a tragedy into something almost bureaucratic. There was an entire industry built around getting people back. Religious orders, most famously the Trinitarians, existed specifically to raise money and negotiate the release of captives. Entire church collections, government committees, even royal treasuries were dedicated to ransoming citizens back from North Africa. And ransoming wasn't simple. It wasn't just pay X amount and go. There was a whole chain of hidden fees, a cut for the local governor, a port tax, a fee for the official document proving you were now free, a fee for the interpreter, a fee for the guards escorting you to the ship. Every single person involved in the transaction took a slice. A rich captive could be worth 5 times his purchase price by the time all the fees were paid. One government in England was so overwhelmed by the scale of it that in the 1640s it set up an official parliamentary committee just to manage ransom payments for captured citizens. At one point, thousands of English captives were being held in Algiers at the same time, and some captives never got ransomed at all. Their way out was converting, because enslaving a fellow Muslim was against the rules of the system. Conversion meant freedom. It also meant you could almost never go home again, since your own country might now see you as an outsider, or worse, a traitor to your faith. Even a famous name got swept into this system. The author of one of the most important novels in Spanish literature spent nearly 5 years as a captive in Algiers before he was finally ransomed. So this wasn't chaos. It was a functioning, self-sustaining economy, built on capture, labor, and the hope of rescue. By the early 1800s, European navies and a newly formed United States Navy had had enough. Naval bombardments, blockades, and shifting political power in the Mediterranean slowly dismantled the corsair strongholds. The trade didn't vanish overnight, but by the mid-1800s it was effectively finished, brought down not by outrage, but by naval force and colonization. For nearly 300 years, an entire coastline ran on this system: capture, transport, sale, and sometimes ransom. It shaped the fears of entire nations, drained royal treasuries, and quietly moved hundreds of thousands of people across the Mediterranean world. It's one of those pieces of history that got buried. Not because it wasn't significant, but because it doesn't fit the story most people expect to hear. And it's not the only trade route history conveniently forgot. If this surprised you, the next one will too. Tease specific next video topic, chalk title here. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it, and I'll see you in the next one.